So how was your lunch break? Good? Anybody go outside? Yeah? What's it like? Breezy? Was anybody here yesterday? It was 85 degrees. Welcome to Chicago. We'll see what it'll be tomorrow, right? All right, we're about ready. A few more people may straggle in. We do have some chairs, so we may point some people in your directions. What do they say at the theater? Scattered singles only, except for the front row. All right, welcome. My name is Lucille Eber. If you weren't at the session this morning, then welcome. Nice to meet you. We are doing a session today on district and school level alignment of SEL, Social Emotional Learning, and PBIS. And I have Jessica Aquilina with me today, who is our reality check woman. I first met Jessica when she was a principal in Scranton over 10 years ago. And Jessica's now a superintendent in Forest City Regional School District. And she continues to help our mental health integration team learn about what really works and why it works and what doesn't work and what needs to change, because she's always connected with us through Kelly Perales, who's on our team, which is how we first met her. So I'm really honored that she traveled here today to share the experiences going through this currently at the moment in her school district. We were going to have Brian Kelly, one of her principals, but it's too much money to have too many people come, right? And things are a little tight. So we have Brian here in spirit, and Jessica will channel him. And just to think about this, to ground you and get you ready, you know, where are you at? You don't have to answer this question, just think about it in terms of your PBIS, and is there dialogue about SEL being something different, being the same thing? Is it operating separately? Is it operating together? Are you exploring integration? Have you already adopted both PBIS and SEL? Have you adopted an integrated mode? Okay. I'm expecting there are people here at all levels of implementation, including people who are already fully implementing, and here to tell us a little bit in the dialogue part that we have at the end. We do want your feedback to help us plan for future sessions. There's Q code picture. You can take a picture of it in the back. You're in the C session. It's also in the PowerPoint. We'll put it up at the end. So we're going to do a little defining and discussing social emotional learning in PBS and how to integrate the social emotional learning into your PBIS framework. And we're going to discuss strategies for replicating at the district and building level. And this presentation is based off of a recent technical brief, a technical guide, a product of the National PBIS Technical Assistance Center that's posted at www.pbis.org, called Teaching Social Emotional Competencies Within a Framework. Has anybody seen this yet? It's relatively new. Some of you have. Well, I'm going to give you the overview of the document, and then Jessica's going to talk a little bit about it within her district. So in the technical guide, our goal was to describe how school personnel can teach social emotional competencies within the PBIS framework so that we can have systemic school-wide implementation of anything behavioral health, if you will, through one system, one set of teams, one set of data and approaches, right? And recommendations for how to adjust the framework to ensure that you are expanding your instruction for a full range of social emotional learning. There are plenty of chairs. You don't need to sit on the floor. Okay, if you need the back support, go for it. All right, so I probably don't need to, with this crowd, go through why we need to be teaching social emotional competencies, but in the beginning part of the brief, a discussion about our world context in terms of the need for more mental health prevention for kids. And so if this data is new to you, I suppose it's not to some, but schools have become the place, the default system for mental health. And it's a little scary to think about, but schools actually are the biggest mental health providers out of any agency. And we know that because we have all the kids, right? And juvenile justice is the default agency for lack of adequate prevention and intervention for mental health. And we do have a crisis in terms of suicide, especially with young adults in this country. So, and then there's a lot of new data trends and new information coming out. NAMI's mentioned up there, opioid crisis, and kids with internalizing mental health conditions who do not get recognized and noticed as readily as kids with externalizing mental health conditions, right? The big idea here is in schools, mental health needs to be everybody's job. The prevalence rates of kids who need some level of mental health support during their school years is in the 20% range, right? So that's too big a number in terms of dealing with that one kid at a time. And we need to prevent these problems from escalating. So the idea of from parents to principals to teachers to the lunch staff, creating a safe learning environment, helping build protective factors, helping diminish the impact of the risk factors outside of school, and kids experience plenty of risk factors inside of school, becomes everybody's job. So embedding social, emotional, behavioral competencies into all aspects of the learning day and being monitored by all staff is how we improve academic performance and quality of life for our kids as they leave the system. So we have to have an equal focus on social emotional competencies as we do on academic learning and academic competencies. Because kids who are not socially and emotionally safe and solid are not able to learn, are not able to perform at school. And there's plenty of research to back that up. If you look at definitions of social-emotional learning, the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. That's a mouthful. But I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So this is a definition from Castle here in Illinois, right? And in our technical guide, we talk about increasingly researchers have recommended teaching within a prevention-focused, multi-tiered public health framework is necessary. Just adopting a curriculum is not enough. We have to make sure that we're actually teaching the skills that meet the needs of the kids based on data versus Monday lesson 1, Tuesday lesson 2, Wednesday lesson 3, right? We need to make choices and we need to embed it systemically. So using the PBIS framework is a way to provide the necessary system to facilitate implementation, because mere training and teaching is not enough, right? So we know within the PBIS system, we've had success because of the system features. The behavioral science of PBIS is not new in the last 20 years. I was trained in behavioral science as a special ed teacher. Okay, we're going to talk the 70s here, right? What's new is the system features. And the system features are how we get school-wide, all staff, and actually change the culture and the environment inside the building. And PBIS as a multi-tiered framework, for implementing evidence-based practices, this is the definition, informed by implementation science. And the implementation science were those stages I showed you at the beginning of the presentation for your own learning. First you explore, then you adopt, then you install. Installation is very important. You install the data systems, the teaming practices and the teaming routines. You install the evaluation procedures, and you install the professional development that includes coaching and performance feedback to make sure that the people we train are actually delivering the instruction in a way that's likely to produce learning, right? Those are the system features that we're talking about with PBIS. These are the system features within the implementation science. So teaming, data, training and coaching, and explicit instruction are the features that we're going to focus on here today for our dialogue around integrating SEL within PBIS. So in the framework, prevention-focused continuum of supports data-based decision-making, regular screening and progress monitoring, and that systems change I mentioned earlier, the change of the climate and the environment and the routines and the procedures inside the building through the ongoing professional development and coaching. The team-based leadership is how you select the evidence-based practice, and you use the data within the teams to make the selection, and then to check to see if the teaching occurred and if the learning occurred. That's what we mean by the system features. You could apply that to math, reading, social emotional, right? Same thing. It's not just the instruction and you've done your job. It's installing the system features to make sure that we get the outcomes. Now, over the past 20 years, there's been very strong documented effects of this systems framework through PBIS implementation. And student outcomes, adult outcomes, and now what we're really focusing on through the National PBIS Technical Assistance Center with our mental health team that I'm honored to be part of the lead on is expanding our continuum of instruction to make sure that we're doing a broader range of skills that will help prevent and support kids, especially with more internalizing mental health issues, right? So we're looking about expanding, and the good news is it's all instructionally based. Sometimes we would, or not sometimes, still we find in schools, if it's about anxiety or emotional regulation, for example, or coping skills, sometimes we back off as educators and say, oh, somebody else, we need a clinical psychologist to teach that, right? And I think we've made huge gains over the past 10, 20 years in terms of building the competence and the competence of teachers using their good instructional skills around social emotional competencies in addition to reading and math, where it can go hand in hand because it's part of the environment in the building that we positively support the emotional and social growth of kids along with teaching them skills. And it does become part of business as usual, as opposed to we teach SEL on Tuesdays at 10 o'clock, right? And that's where the PBIS framework helps, because we refer back to the matrix of skills continuously, and we're constantly checking on the learning. Now, we really need to deliberately integrate, right? As opposed to we train the teachers in PBIS, then we do some sessions on SEL and toss them a curriculum and tell them to do it. That would be the non-example of what we don't want, right? What we want is deliberate decision-making by the district-level leaders. I have a superintendent here today who's going to talk about that, right? It's district-level decisions about how we spend our professional development time and which data points should we address through our various curriculum and what are going to be our priorities. Instead of doing a little bit of everything, trying to do what we do, prioritize it to the most important needs of our students based on the data, and checking to make sure that it's learned, right? So, despite these advances, school teams implementing PBIS sometimes overlook teaching important social-emotional competencies or view this domain as separate from their PBIS. Anybody experiencing that? Right? Okay. Instead of integrating social and emotional competency instruction within their PBIS framework, schools may implement a packaged social-emotional learning curriculum that is not connected to other behavior support systems in the school. So again, some of you are having these types of experience, and you need to make some deliberate decisions in terms of how to integrate them, right? So some of the decisions you might be making might be which skills based on which data, okay? And how are we going to measure it? And how are we going to adapt our instruction based on data? In other words, if it's we're not exactly getting the results that we want, then how are we going to change it and adapt it? You've done this with teaching expectations on the playground. You've done this possibly with the use of high rates of praise in the classroom. opportunities to respond in the classroom around academics, and we want to do those same types of applications around social and emotional skills, and again through the team-based decision. So just take a minute and think about where you're at. Let's take a look around the room. Our PBIS team is already using social skills, SEL, or life skills within our PBIS team. Anybody there? Good, good, right? Our PBIS team is looking at potential SEL curriculum. Some of you are there? Or our PBIS team has not yet considered aligning our SEL curriculum. So as I suspected, we have people who represent all three of those groups. There's a lot of dialogue going on around the country about SEL and PBIS. And again, we got to think efficiency, and we need to think outcomes relative to our efforts. So, big idea, aligned approaches. One thing to consider is if you're not aligning, you may not be getting the best benefit of your separate curriculums. And this would apply to if your bully prevention isn't aligned, or if you have restorative practices that are not aligned, if people are sent to separate trainings, and if the teachers are left on their own to figure out what they're supposed to do when, instead of the district team merging it together in the training, right at the training and coaching level is where the deliberate alignment needs to happen. So you can use the PBIS framework, the teams, the data, selection of practices, skills, progress monitoring, and coaching. You can use those features to align them together. And the question is what you do is guided by the data, and the how you do it is guided by the core features of the PBIS system in terms of progress monitoring, and select your skills based on data, and coach people through to proficiency, and get feedback from people as to whether or not it's working, and then look at some hard data as to whether or not it's working. So that's what we mean by the how being guided by the PBIS core curriculum. All right, so how many of you have a district leadership team in the district or the districts that you work with, where a group of district leaders oversees the implementation of your school-wide behavior support systems? Excellent, good. Because these decisions should not be left building to building, and they should not be left teacher to teacher. So the blueprint picture that Heather used this morning in her presentation that you see a lot, I think I even showed it when I went over the logistics of the conference this morning, right? This is the key to the alignment. Alignment happens at the district level with a leadership team who looks up to these issues. For example, workforce capacity. You know, we worked with some states where it was routine for counselors to come in and teach social emotional lessons while the teacher had a planning period, right? Now, there's a work personnel issue that needs to change. Because how are the teachers going to support and do the transference and generalization when it's not even their job to teach the skills? We've moved away from those models largely, but not completely. But that's an example of that's a district decision about job descriptions and who functions in what manner. And of course, when you're going to do something new and different, you may not want to implement it in every school at the same time, but pick a few places where the district leaders can make sure that the training, coaching, feedback, and the expertise are in place, and then the feedback, see these arrows go both ways? Feedback down from the demos back up to the district team to fine-tune the process. It's not a one-shot decision-making deal. It's decisions that need to be monitored and changed and supported until we get the impact that we need. How many of you are familiar with the interconnected system framework? Great. So the interconnected system framework is simply a system and structure and process for bringing any kind of mental health supports into the PBIS framework. Whether, again, it's SEL curriculum, suicide prevention, bullying prevention, trauma-informed care. We've got so many separate names for mental health, right? We put together the Interconnected System Framework monograph. Jessica was one of our early implementers of that in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And we finally put the monograph together, I think in 2012-13, around that time. And we're working on volume 2 with a lot of how-tos. But the idea of SEL integration falls under this umbrella of you have to have a structure and process that's guided by the key stakeholders who have the authority to reallocate resources, change role and function. So this is a district level decision to figure out how these core features can be used to encompass all of our mental health initiatives and not have separate teams, separate training, separate people, separate decision making, separate data systems. And so the Interconnected System Framework, some of you may have already been to some of the sessions here at the forum on that, talk about using teams and data and screening and progress monitoring with all of our mental health implementation. And so when we talk about social emotional learning and PBIS or and all the other things I mentioned, talking about a single system of delivery. And just connecting kids to it is not enough. You know, in the mental health arena, we spent a lot of time as an outcome of a school mental health program, a lot of times would be how many kids were referred and got a service. That would be like counting the number of kids who go to reading class as an outcome of how many kids can read. Just because you get access doesn't mean you're getting the outcome. So we're pushing for the accountability that we're actually producing some outcomes for the effort extended is pretty important. Kids and families deserve outcomes, not we hope in 5 years this will produce an effect, right? So this is a big message with our mental health integration. The SEL curriculum piece also fits really well with mental health is for all because we're talking about tier 1 in terms of teaching these skills on a prevention basis, as well as in tier 2 groups, kids who have higher needs around anxiety and aren't learning the coping skills through tier 1 may be pulled into a targeted group for more instruction and more practice around coping skills, but then it connects back to something that's taught at tier 1 so it can be reinforced in the classroom. And of course, using the MTSS features of team data, right? And we're going to talk about promoting the adult wellness as well by creating a nurturing staff environment. When staff are given the support they need and the information they need around mental health, that's going to help their mental health. And when they see a system of support and they know where to go for what, and when they know what's happening with kids who are being pulled out for other interventions and how they can support it back in the classroom, and we have a positive environment with their voices contributing through the team process, those are some of the ways we can ensure a nurturing and safe adult environment. When the adults know that we're teaching the behavioral expectations to the kids, and we're going to have clarity about what goes to the office and what doesn't go to the office, the basic PBIS system contributes to that a lot. The instructional piece is really critical, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. Okay, so the district supports the building teams by providing the resources and the support and the time and the training and clarity about the instruction and the curriculum, right? When the data that we look at to decide what to teach should include the community data examples. There are some examples on the right side as well as on the left side. We have to look outside the school for data in the community. And this is why in the Interconnected System Framework, we want the mental health partners to actually sit on the teams in the building and provide their viewpoint of the data and bring community data to the table, right? In terms of hospitalization rates, suicide attempt rates in the community, increase in food pantry visits, homelessness, families, military families being deployed, natural disasters and other disasters that strike communities. These are community issues. And in the Interconnected System Framework, a key feature is the school personnel having family voice, youth voice, and community partners at the table, at the teams, looking at the data and being a part of the process. An example of how schools can look further with data to find kids who might be at risk and need a higher tier of social emotional learning support. If you notice on this form, it's not called an office discipline referral form. It's called a time out of class form. So it's also for kids who go and seek support from the nurse or the school counselor. So this is one way schools, and when we first learned this, there was a mental health provider sitting on a school team in our early days with the Interconnected System Framework, and this person said, you know, we've had lots of kids who are clients at the mental health center who get out of class without being kicked out of class. And it was kind of an aha moment that we're not looking deep enough for all the kids who are exhibiting a need for social emotional learning. So that's just one example of expanding the data. Developing systems for supporting adults implementing SEL within a PBIS framework. The instructional approach is comforting to most teachers, right? And we need to help them understand that this is teaching, this is instruction, this is something that you can be comfortable doing. And of course, using the data and giving back the data and discussing the data with the teachers so we can continuously improve our systems. And of course, showcasing the effort and the impact and leading with coaching, right? So from a small number of staff delivering lessons to all staff providing opportunities to teach in all settings. And the way that's done is clarifying and understanding that it's just the same teaching process. Define, model, practice, monitor, reteach, right? And we do that when we start with PBIS, right? Teaching behavioral expectations. It's the same thing here when we're teaching emotional regulation or coping skills. It is the same. So we may be used to things like keep hands and feet to self, or make sure everyone gets a turn in all work on time on our matrix. But how about pick up trash even if it isn't yours? These are some examples we've gotten from different schools. How do we make our school environment better for everybody? Encourage others. Tell a peer they did a good job. Choose kindness over being right. These are some of the examples we've seen making it into the matrix, right? So customizing to fit your student and staff needs, right? And that is part of the prioritizing of which skills we're going to teach rather than which curriculum are we going to adopt. It's what are the skills we need to teach based on the data. Right? If we're in a neighborhood where a large percentage of the kids have experienced trauma in the community, you don't want to just do pull-out for kids who already show fight, flight, and freeze responses. You'll want to embed that down in Tier 1 and teach kids ways of coping, right, and preventing the fight, flight, and freeze responses from developing. So again, knowing your data, prioritizing and choosing your skills, identifying lessons and working them into the matrix. This is an example from some of our partners in Ohio who are talking about the cafeteria as a place to embed teaching of social emotional skills, not just teaching healthy eating habits. And this has evolved over time, this example, to a school who did a survey for kids, right, and found around anxiety and social situations, and a lot of kids feeling that the lunch situation was very anxiety-provoking for them. So instead of a pull-out group run by a counselor, right, instead we're going to embed it down into the Tier 1 because the numbers were fairly high on the survey of kids who were reporting anxiety around the lunch situation. So you see skills on this Tier 1 matrix embedded right in there as part of a priority at Tier 1. As opposed to a lesson taught on Tuesdays at 10 o'clock to a few kids, right? So embedding it into the Tier 1 curriculum, linking it to the expectations, linking it to the natural environment, and making it clear. Here's another one around technology. Under respect, words matter, pause and reflect before you post, right? See, there's been quite an expansion in our PBIS Tier 1 teaching matrix based on data. You take student surveys, you're going to find that social media has increased all kinds of emotional reactions and social issues and social vulnerabilities and anxieties of kids. And in certain schools that we've borrowed these examples from, they have gone to the extent of incorporating, we will call these social emotional support skills inside the Tier 1 curriculum. The idea here is make it part of your whole system, not something separate that goes by the wayside. And when you think about how will we teach emotional behavior skills, when will we teach social emotional skills, think about what you've learned with PBIS. What you've learned with PBIS is it's not a one-shot deal, right? What you have is you might have kickoff events when you start something new, the new behavior of the month, or when you're starting up your PBIS, ongoing direct instruction embedded into curriculum, check your data and see which skills you need to boost. Now you may need to add some data points besides office discipline referrals, and a lot of schools and school districts and states are using various examples of youth surveys. Some people with older kids are using youth focus groups and other ways to get feedback from kids and from teachers about what social emotional skills we need to prioritize. Continued visibility, right? Posters, etc. All the same things that you've learned with the basic behavioral expectations you start PBIS with. When you expand to include your social emotional skills at somewhat deeper level in certain areas, use the same structures. Use the same continuous instruction, data, and checking. And here's an example. How many of you are familiar with check and check out? Whoa, this check and check out crowd for sure. Okay, so one of our favorite tools in the integration of mental health and PBIS has become what we call the layered DPR. And as you're familiar with check and check out, the daily progress report and the basic behavioral expectations, what you see in this particular example is examples of kids who are in various social emotional instructional groups and embedding the skills they might be learning in the groups on their check and check out card. So if kids in a certain group might have on their check and check out, use calm words with peers. Now, what does this do? A couple of things. Number one, we're at Tier 2 now with social skills, social emotional competencies. In a pull-out group, what's the biggest drawback in terms of practicing the skills outside of the natural environment? Biggest drawback would be transference and generalization. Good answer from the front. Okay, so transference and generalization means if I practice it here in this small group, when I go over here and my anxiety gets triggered in the classroom, will I be able to use the skill I was taught over here? And the only way to overcome that drawback of transference and generalization is to make the link between the instructional environment and the natural environment and do it in the natural environment. And check in, check out happens in the classroom and gives the teacher the opportunity to prompt and pre-correct and reinforce a specific skill but linked to the Tier 1 expectation, which makes it easy for the teacher. They know how to do it, and the teacher doesn't have to remember who's in what group or what skill are they working on. It is also a way to monitor the effectiveness of the skill group in some regards, although most of the skill groups will have some other survey to go with them, often with a student self-report when we're talking about anxiety and depression and things of that nature. The other way at Tier 2 that and this is my last example, little Tier 2, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jessica, who's going to drop us back down to the big picture. But another example with embedding social emotional skills and moving up the tiers, you're familiar with Tier 2 groups where skills are taught. The most frequent place people would teach social emotional skills. But what we were finding was there would be the PBIS social skills group on real direct behavior, and then there'd be these mental health groups over here where people would teach coping skills. And sometimes the mental health groups over here were not being monitored or coached, progress monitored, or connected back to the classroom for transference and generalization. So the idea of pulling things into one system is you apply the system features across all interventions. And you have the knowledge and expertise of all people connected with any part of the social emotional learning system into one team. In this particular example, one of the things we're learning is what we call the continuum of groups. So let's talk about a group teaching coping skills to stay with our examples of emotional regulation and learning coping skills. If you have kids who are at risk for difficulty in that area, let's say they're exposed to trauma, and then you have also kids who are already in active trauma responses every day, right? You wouldn't need to put you would not want to put all those kids into the same instructional group. Because one instructional group, you can go right to the instruction and the practice with the kids who are at risk. With the kids who are in active fight, flight, and freeze type behaviors every day, you're going to need to start your groups with perhaps the emotional barometer and teach them how to self-check where you are. How are you feeling today on a scale of 1 to 5? Are you familiar with emotional barometer, right? You may have to do a mindfulness technique to get them grounded and clear themselves of today's events before you launch into the instruction of replacement behaviors for fight, flight, and freeze. So now we're talking about social emotional competencies on the prevention level, right? Everybody tier 1. Some kids moving up to need a higher level of instruction, and some kids moving up to need a level of instruction with even more psychotherapeutic techniques, such as the emotional barometer, right, and the mindfulness technique, and we are not even at tier 3, right? Because usually we jump straight to individualized support for any kid who would demonstrate anything that felt like it was, quote, mental health. So we're really excited about building social emotional learning into the continuum, and it's the lower tiers that create the most challenge for us for alignment. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Jessica, and we're going to hear an example from the field from Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
Are you hooked up?
I think so. Seems that way. Good afternoon, everyone. Just let me get this hooked on and away we'll go. Oh. It's tight. Okay. As Lucille said, I have been working within this interconnected system framework for the last 10 years of my career. I'm super proud to be a superintendent of a small rural district in northeastern Pennsylvania, where we are committed to building a K-12 continuum of integration of mental health services, PBIS, and social emotional learning to meet the needs of all of our students. Something that I want to share with you is that our mantra in our school district is every child, every need, every day. And I want you to think about that for a minute, instead of it just being a tagline, and think about what that means within the context of the triangle of PBIS for academics and behavior. And now think again about every child, every need, every day. And what does that look like? It's a ton of really hard work and a ton of systems work from the district level to the building level to the community level, and everybody working together to make sure that we truly are meeting the academic, social, emotional needs of all of our students. So when I became the superintendent in Forest City Regional, I pretty quickly realized that the rural nature of our district was presenting some barriers to accessing mental health services for our families. The data in our district, the community perception data, was really indicating that we had a lot of work to do regarding bully prevention and creating a safe environment for our students. And we recognized pretty early on that the work that we were doing was certainly not meeting the needs of all of our kids. So when we dug in deep and we started to do some pretty targeted work around bully prevention, around integration of social emotional learning, PBIS in the elementary school, and we had all of these great initiatives happening, and we accomplished a lot. During the last 2 years, we did integrate a bully prevention program across the K-12 continuum. We are implementing PBIS K-6. We have social emotional learning from K-8. but we recognized that we have all this work going on and everybody was starting to suffer from initiative burnout. I'm sure that you guys all can shake your heads and remember that. So what I just shared with you really sets up the context for the crux of this presentation today. Is we all have all of this great work happening in our districts, but a lot of the times it's separate committees doing separate work, and we're not working together to make sure that we're getting the best outcomes for our kids. And something that really struck our team, it was June last year at our end of the year PBIS meeting. We did have Kelly Perales there with us. She does provide us technical support and consultation. And we were all sitting in the room, and the people on the Tier 1 team, many of them serve on several of the different committees that we have running. And we're sitting there talking about all of the work we're doing. And Kelly said, you know, geez, this should go together. The team then decided to go out for a walk in the building, and they did an environmental scan. And you're going to see the pictures as I'm going through my slides, and you're going to really understand pretty quickly why we realized we needed to stop and work to integrate all of the great work we're doing under the PBIS framework. We all know here that the principles of the PBIS framework work. Explicit direction, clear expectations, reinforcing behaviors when we see what we're looking for, and then reteaching and providing additional support to the kids who are not getting it. So as I go through these slides, I think you'll get a chuckle a few times when you see what our kids were exposed to over the course of a day in our small elementary school. So we had, as I already said, PBIS, bully prevention, social emotional learning, student assistance program, or SAP, and then we have what's called community school-based mental health. That is a team of mental health providers who are working in our school district every day. They are not employees of the district, but they are there full-time every day working with Tier 3 students across K to 8. So each of our initiatives had a separate process and a separate team, as I said. So up here, you see our ready, respectful, and responsible for our PBIS. But then on the other side, you see another clip chart for what was related to our classroom expectations and social emotional learning. Then we also had different nomination processes for each of the different initiatives that we had. So our teachers were really trying to navigate through 5 different referral forms, depending on what the students needed help with. So any of you who work in a school know that it's crazy. And so as we looked at our different signs and our different referral forms, we knew that we needed to make a change. And the work that Kelly shared with us, she did share that document with us related to the integration of all of your behavioral initiatives under the umbrella of PBIS, which is what we have started to do. When we look at our social emotional learning curriculum, the strengths that we have in our district right now is that we are using evidence-based programs across the K to 8 continuum. We use PATH, we use Botman Life Skills. Students do receive explicit instruction. But as Lucille just referred to, what was happening was this information was being shared with our kiddos in isolation in a classroom during a period of time during their week, but the information was not integrated in the rest of their school setting. So when kids left that classroom, they were going back into their regular classroom, and they were still working within our PBIS framework, but the language and the strategies and the supports of the social emotional learning curriculum were not integrated across all classrooms and areas. So that was definitely one of the challenges that we recognized, was that we needed to figure out a way to integrate the social emotional learning across all classrooms and all settings. So we started that process and started to look at our PBIS framework. Same thing was happening to us with PBIS. We had a lot of growth in our PBIS. When I became the superintendent in Forest City, we had a different elementary school principal, and PBIS had been integrated. I took one walk through the elementary school and I said, this is not PBIS, this is consequences for kids. I'm walking around and all I saw were signs everywhere telling kids what was going to happen to them if they didn't follow the rules. And I said, I don't think this is PBIS. So we relaunched, we started from ground zero all over again. Fortunately, we did hire a principal who had experience with integrating PBIS, and I'm very proud of the work that's happening there now. We have an excellent acknowledgement system. Our kids love it because it's technologically savvy. They get to go scan their tickets at iPad stations that are located throughout the school, and they do a great job of acknowledging staff and kids because every ticket is labeled and the teacher is connected to the ticket and then the student is. So it's really, that's a neat way, and the kids seem to like that. Relaunching the system and forming it around the way the framework is intended to be integrated greatly increased the staff buy-in, because I think that they were missing some critical pieces, which we all know then of course makes teachers say, well, this doesn't work. Well, no, it doesn't work if all you're doing is focusing on consequences for kids who don't know how to behave. Another strength that we have with our PBIS protocol is that our mental health providers sit on our tier 1 and 2 teams. They are a part of this work. They're always at the table, and they are utilizing the same protocols that we're using in our classrooms with the students that they work with as well. So they're integrated. One of the challenges, again, at grades 4, 5, and 6, our children move around. Our teachers are departmentalized, so they're moving among the 3 different teachers. And what we realized is that in a grade level, we had 3 different sets of classroom expectations for kids. We learned that on our environmental scan that we did. I highly recommend taking the time to do that, because walking through the building through the eyes of the children and seeing what they experience was really eye-opening for all of us, and it really led to all of the great changes that we're making. So that's what we saw, that across the classrooms, that the kids were just seeing these different expectations and different signs, and we knew we needed to do something about that. So what we did to make improvements, and I want you to know we are definitely a work in progress, and you're going to hear that as I go through what we've accomplished so far and then the work that lies ahead of us. We changed that referral process, and we created a form, and I'm not going to say we, I'm going to say Mr. Kelly, and this is why I wish he was here, because if our principal was here to share with you the great work that he's accomplished with his team, it would probably be better coming from his mouth than mine, but I'm going to do the best that I can to share it with you. They created a document called a request for assistance. It's one form that any teacher can fill out, and it really is just gathering information about the child. And I'm going to get a copy of that to Lucille so that she can post it, and any of you are welcome to take a look at it. But it really, that form is then reviewed by a team that includes the building principal, the school counselor, the school psychologist, and the supervisor of special education. They review the referral forms, and then they make decisions based on the data of the kids, the interventions that have been tried, to connect children with supports and services as appropriate. So the teachers are very happy to not be trying to toggle back and forth between 5 different forms, and so far the feedback we're getting on that is very positive. We're also changing our teaming structures. We were running a safety committee, a bully prevention committee, a PBIS committee. Really, at the end of the day, all of these committees have the same goal of creating a safe, effective, relevant environment for kids where they feel valued and they're connected to caring adults, right? That's the overarching goal of all this work. So we have reduced these teams down, and we have core groups of people coming together to look at data and to talk about this work. That is going to continue to be refined as we move forward, but I think that folks are very happy to not be having to give up 4 nights a month and just able to come together and really focus on the crux of the work. The ditch the clip, I spoke about that before with all of the different classroom matrices and expectations. The team worked after our environmental scan. The grade level teams came together and they developed classroom expectations across a grade level span, and they were able to integrate in the social emotional learning. So they talked about what are our hot spots, what are the biggest issues we're facing right now, and they did integrate those into the classroom matrices and expectations. We're really excited to continue and expand that work across all of our behavioral matrices across all areas of the school, and certainly excited, as I'm sure you guys were, in Lucille's part of the presentation, when you think about social media, technology, and all the challenges that we're facing with that, it makes sense for us to be addressing those issues at Tier 1 within our PBIS frameworks. Professional development and technical support and consultation, I will tell you that our teams they meet often, they are reflective, they look at data. That's a critical piece of this work. I also don't think we would be moving forward at the rate that we are if we didn't have the support of Kelly Perales. We're really fortunate in Pennsylvania that Kelly works for the Midwest PBIS network, but she lives in Pennsylvania, so we're super thankful to have her. We did get a grant last year, and we got another grant, I just found out today, so we'll be able to continue to work with Kelly, and we're super thankful for that. The social emotional learning is still going to be taught by she's a library specialist, but the change that we made for this year is that she's sharing all of the information regarding the lessons with the classroom teachers and the other specials teachers and the language that's being utilized so that everyone is aware and everyone can integrate that into their vernacular in the classroom. We definitely know that we need to look for a solution to having the classroom teachers be the instructors. But right now, as I'm sure you're all facing the same thing, with limited instructional time, our classroom teachers, especially at the elementary school, are it's a struggle to get them to give up that time. But they are now at least sharing the information, and we're certainly going to integrate it into all of our behavioral matrices. So this fall, we are going to continue to look for opportunities to work and communicate and engage our families in this conversation. I think that for me, the discourse that's going on in our country right now makes this outreach to families and communities even more important, because we're working really hard to teach our kids to be good human beings and be empathetic and kind and caring. And sometimes then they go home at night and they watch the news and the messages don't align. So it's really important to me that we're, in my community, all on the same page, that kindness, caring, supporting one another, being safe is really important. So that increased communication and collaboration with families and finding authentic ways to engage them and to bring them to the table is something we're working on. As I said, we're certainly going to work to continue to integrate the social emotional learning up through grade 6. And then this last bullet is already happening. The students who are continuing to demonstrate through their behavior that they need additional teaching and support, I know that our library specialist who does the social emotional learning, as well as our building principal, our school psychologist, work with small groups of kids to reteach and to reinforce the lessons that are being taught in the social emotional learning curriculum. So I do know that that's already happening. Of course. We use PATH at K to 3, and then we use Botvan Life Skills beyond PATH. And we're going to be researching ourselves social emotional learning for beyond grade 8, because we only have Botvan up to grade 8. So none of this we use evidence-based programs for this across the K to 8. And I will say this, our library specialist, really, she took this on last year when we got a grant for Botvan Life Skills through the University of Colorado. And then when we did that, we said, well, we're not just going to do this in grades 5 through 8. We're going to do this, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it across the continuum. And then that's when she stepped right up and was willing to integrate that into the work that she did in the library. Another big goal for us is to expand PBIS into our high school. We are very unique in that we are 800 students in pre-K to 12, and we're all under one roof. So our elementary school is pre-K to 6. That's connected to our high school, which is 7 to 12, which is connected to the district office. So it is a very special situation, and I feel so blessed to be a part of it. But in our high school last year, we also developed, which I didn't mention before, and I'm sorry, a middle school within our high school. Something else that was glaring to me, my first year there, I'm walking down the hallway, and I have these little 7th graders walking in the same space with seniors that are 6'4", big guys, and I thought, oh my goodness, they're scared, they're nervous. It's already a big transition to come out of that safe cocoon of an elementary school, right? So we developed a middle school within our high school. So our 7th and 8th graders are in their own section of the building, and we have developed middle school teams that are working with the Pennsylvania Association of Middle Level Education to make sure that our 7th and 8th graders have access to developmentally appropriate curriculum, instruction, behavioral support. So they're in their own little middle school within the high school. But this expansion into our high school, it is something that I can't wait to happen, because year after year I watch and I say, we've got to do this, because high school kids need those clear expectations. They need to be explicitly taught. They need to be acknowledged for when they demonstrate those behaviors, and then they need to be retaught and supported when they can't. So I'm really looking forward to that. And we just hired a new high school principal who has experience with PBIS, so we're super excited. That district community leadership team is another goal of ours that's in our strategic plan, and we're going to be looking to reach across. We're in 3 counties, our district as well. Demographically, we cross 3 different counties, so I'm going to be looking to connect with mental health providers and community leaders from all 3 counties. And then obviously that goal of making sure that we have developed that interconnected system framework across the K-12 continuum. So that's Forest City.
So we have time for some discussion, a couple of comments. One of the reasons I always appreciate working with Jessica is because she's always a work in progress, right? Even in Scranton as a building principal. And she's got some different features going on and going one step at a time. But you notice she snuck in there early on that the mental health providers are already sitting on the PBIS teams. That's from her work in Scranton from the Interconnected System Framework, because she had previously experienced a separate mental health system, lots of mental health providers, and nobody knew what was going on with the kids. So I know she's never going back there again. So I was not surprised to see that she already had the community providers on the team. So now her challenge is to move from separate delivery to integrated delivery of SEL. And I love the fact that she's already using the matrix to integrate the lessons, even though she hasn't transferred the location of the instruction. You know, the idea here is you assess your strengths and your needs and your contextual fit. And your leadership makes decisions by talking with principals and other people versus somebody from the outside coming in and saying, now you must do this, 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 and this all at the same time. And we always say, stand back and assess before you pick your strategies. And the environmental scan leading to the merged matrices is one of the first steps, because who did they have in mind when they did that environmental scan? The kids. They did it from a student viewpoint. So that's impressive. All right, questions, comments? Yes, ma'am.
What have you found is the best way to measure your social emotional learning outcomes for those individual students?
One of the challenges with social emotional learning outcomes is some of them are stated in a way that are hard to measure. I know that in Illinois, Illinois was one of the first states to have social emotional learning, were they called objectives? Competencies, thank you. And when we went through the first set of them, about 60% were not easy to measure or able to be measured. So it's the wording of them, and so you got to be careful what you're looking for. A lot of them can be linked to the matrix and linked to minors, majors, office discipline referrals. Others call for student feedback and student surveys. I met with Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Youth Survey. A lot of places have youth surveys. Did I talk about here? That was in my last session, maybe, I can't remember. But, you know, student feedback is often important. Teacher feedback is often important. But linking the skills within the matrix and having this discussion ahead of time, right? Sometimes it is feedback from kids. Sometimes it's feedback from teachers. Sometimes it's direct behavioral observations. But be careful in terms of doing something that you don't know how to measure. Have that dialogue first. Okay? Does that help? Yes, sir.
Just a question about bringing the mental health people out into the school from the community. How is that funded, or how does that work?
That's funded in many, many different ways. The first thing I'm going to tell you is the best resource for that outside of this quick discussion obviously this won't be enough. If you go to midwestpbis.org and under content, click on Interconnected System Framework, and we have a multitude of recorded webinars and materials, and some of them are directly about funding. When we developed the Interconnected System Framework as an approach for integrating mental health, especially community providers, into PBIS, we did it with an awareness of no state will be the same. So Pennsylvania managed care. They had tons of people in the schools, but it wasn't very outcome-based. Then you go to Illinois, and there is no consistent adequate funding of children's mental health connected to schools. It's catch as catch can around the state. So we came up with the features, but what we're learning about the financial systems is that they're all different, right? So it depends. In some places, one of the best or the most common we're seeing is grant money to start the change, and then constant planning for sustainability from day one of grant funding. So people are rearranging what people do and doing things differently. One of the challenges is there's the 50-minute hour funding methodology that often takes place in mental health. But we're seeing changes all over the country in people understanding about consultation billing and allowing for people to be part of the systems and the planning. And there are so many different ways it's being done, I can't even tell you. In some states, changing funding structures for state mental health. Some places they're using grants differently. Some places are using public funding differently. So I recommend you check out some of the webinars. We get different people on them, and they'll define some of their changes. The managed care one was actually fairly easy to work with, but at the time, nobody had managed care mental health that I knew of other than Pennsylvania back, 10 years ago. And so the managed care one gave us a lot of flexibility for learning. But we had instances in Illinois where it was community funding and the local providers figured out how to do it. And in other places, they had to go to the state and get permission. Like in certain states, the state funds mental health positions in schools, and other places they don't. So there's no two ways to do it. It's challenging, and we provide a document called Guiding Questions to assess funding structures on the web page, where you just get people together and you go through and you say, how are we currently paying for it? What are we getting? What would it look like when it was better? And what do we have the flexibility to change to move towards that better system? That's the approach we take, because you have to first say what you've got. What do you want it to look like? And then this is why it has to be people in leadership and authority to have these discussions. You can't tell the clinicians to fix it. It has to be the administrators. Yep. Here?
Currently we have, when you talk about your library specialist teaching, we currently have school counselors, the elementary level, teaching developmental guidance, and that's our social emotional learning. We're also teaching cool tools for the PBIS. How do those fit together?
Okay, so you start with your data. What are the skills we need to teach versus the curriculum that we have? And so the skills you need to teach, you make one decision. You don't have separate cool tools. They're all lessons. They're all instructional lessons. So align them through your matrix, whatever, and it may require a slight tweak in wording of your matrix, but it does not require you now go from 3 to 5 expectations to 12 expectations. Keep within the 3 to 5 expectations, look at your data, look at your skills, your current cool tools, or sometimes what we say is put them all aside and start from scratch. That might be one way to go. The other way to go is to merge the ones you know that are connected to data points into your matrix. Link them together. And remember, it's all instruction. Everything is instructionally based. So which skills, based on which data, and back to the question, how are we going to know if it worked? So you can either start clean with your matrix based on data, or you can merge it in and see what you're left with and how messy it is, and then what you really don't need. Those are just two off the top of my head, but the idea is one matrix. Yes, ma'am.
So if you were a school building that has 2 outside mental health agencies that each may use different programs when they're doing individual counseling with students, how would you integrate them to measure how that's working?
How much time do we have here? Okay, so the question was, if you have one elementary building with two different mental health providers using various, quote, counseling techniques, how do you merge that in, okay? So the discussion has to be with the administrators from the school district and the administrators from the mental health agency about the desire to have one integrated system of social, emotional, behavioral health, whatever you want to call it, support in our district, which is going to require we change the working relationships between the school and the mental health provider. And we have to make sure that we explore it with the leaders and see if they're open to the change. We look at the PBIS blueprint boxes. We talk about policy, funding, how will this affect our workforce? How will we begin this process? Are people opening to changing their working relationships, their memorandums of understanding, and doing business differently? So it takes the exploration phase in implementation science is bringing together the leaders, proposing a dialogue towards a different future, and then if people are open to the discussion, you have to have enough information to say what it would look like when it was different, and use the boxes of the blueprint. It's going to affect policy, it's going to affect funding, it's going to affect how people work. The main thing is to make sure that before you start the exploration, that somebody has a clear enough idea of what it's supposed to look like when it's different. And again, if you go to midwestpbis.org, where we currently house the ISF structures, you heard Heather say this morning, we're undergoing a change of the PBIS.org, and the ISF stuff is so deep that we put it on a separate page because it was getting lost at PBIS.org. So go to midwestpbis.org, go under content, click on ISF, right? And there are a range of overview recorded webinars, right? The easiest, fastest recorded webinar you can share with people, I actually made for the Kansas state team, and it's posted on our website, and it's just a 20-minute recorded what is ISF. So that one might work for you. But make sure that whoever's going to approach the dialogue with the partners has the authority. You know, you can't have the clinicians do it. You've got to have somebody who's got the authority to change those memorandums of understanding and the authority to propose we have a new business arrangement. And in some places that happens quickly, and in other places people back away and you have to come at it a different way or find a different provider who wants to work in a more comprehensive approach with you. So for example, here's something that will be different. We won't just refer kids for, quote, counseling. All interventions will be labeled and defined. Everybody will know what the dosage is, what the frequency, and what the interaction and the instruction is going to be, and how will we know if it works, versus we hand them to you and you do counseling. Now, some clinical places might be ready for that and others won't. There's been huge changes in the mental health world towards accountability and more clarity about what the interventions are. And some will welcome the opportunity to have an integrated dialogue.
And that,
Please.
I think, is what's critically important about the work that's happening in Pennsylvania. We had what was called BHRS services prior to these community school-based behavioral health teams. And the CSBBH work is all outcomes driven. Outcomes data is collected on the kids and the families. And so there's always a data piece to go back to, and there's massive accountability. It's different.
And defined intervention.
Yes, it's definitely different than what mental health services were prior to, 13 years ago when Kelly Prowlis came and asked us to do this. What Lucille was alluding to is that in my own elementary school, I had mental health providers coming in. I didn't even know who they were. Our teachers didn't know, what are you working towards? What are your goals? How can we help? We're seeing the same behavioral issues with these little ones. Can we work together in a treatment plan to say, if this is the language you're using to support this little one, we want to partner with you and we want to work. And that's really what these community school-based teams are all about.
Pennsylvania is a good one to pay attention to in terms of the managed care provided for a lot of people, right? But not a lot of outcomes. And now things have shifted significantly, and the managed care system has actually helped with that, but only with a push from somebody from a school system to say, We want them at the table. The best way is the clarity is the clinicians need to sit on the teams and be a part of the system. And when kids need interventions at Tier 2 and Tier 3 on these systems teams, the interventions are decided by the team, not by the individual person. And then we all have an understanding of what it's going to be, and it builds the competency and confidence of the school staff in terms of understanding what interventions are needed. And we're finding plenty of interventions previously delivered by non-school clinicians that can be delivered with the support of clinicians in lower level tiers, and we can boost up some of the clinical time for perhaps more kids to receive the highly individualized. So we had a lot of kids with just needs that made school staff feel it was outside their boundary, and it wasn't necessarily a Tier 3 need at an individualized level. Does that make sense? So you want to create a more comprehensive system and everybody be on the same teams and everybody share data, progress monitor, and work together to understand how to support the kid at the classroom level. Most clinicians are thrilled with the thought of a more direct link to the classroom for whatever it is that they're working on with kids. Yes?
In that same vein, kids with disabilities that may be under IDEA and some limitations around, well, I'm from Michigan, so like for instance, social work services have to be provided by someone that's certified in school social work, and then of course through the related services, probably an IEP. Is that an issue?
Not all supports for social and emotional needs for kids with IEPs need to be delivered with a certified school social worker. Interventions can be dropped down at lower tiers. Just because it's anxiety doesn't mean it's individualized or requires a certified person. This is a hard conversation, and not everybody is enthusiastic about this conversation, depending on the politics of the certification issues and et cetera in the particular state you live in. But the idea of excluding kids with disabilities from lower tiered interventions that might be actually more effective, faster in more natural settings is kind of heartbreaking. That, you know, and that's what happens sometimes is kids get excluded from the opportunity because they have a disability, and perhaps probably not what you're saying, so I do not mean you here. Sometimes it's a misinterpretation of the law and the policy that I see a lot of head noddings around the room, that keeps kids with disabilities excluded from potentially more effective interventions delivered in a non-disability context, if you will.
So what, I guess what I'm getting at,
Least restrictive environment for social emotional support too.
what I'm saying is the PBIS structure is available to the kids with disabilities, even though it's not part of an IEP goal or support.
Sure.
Accommodation, and that's what I just want to make sure of. But
Absolutely.
in terms of providing mental health services to those kids, that is not an issue
It's not an issue, but it's not the only way their mental health is supported, I guess is what I'm saying. You know, there is a person that we're really proud to have at this conference, Lucille, who's not usually here, and he specializes in not only behavior issues, but also disability policy issues. And he's working with Tim Lewis on a roundtable around kids with disabilities and PBIS that starts at 4 o'clock. I don't know which room. Look for that one and go have a dialogue with Michelle and Tim Lewis on that topic, if that's a topic of interest to you. They will be much more eloquent about this than I am. And I, okay, all right. I think we still have, how are we on time? Oh, good, okay. There were other hands up. I don't want to put anybody more, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Just real quick, you got to challenge my paradigm. Actually, you did, Jessica.
Okay, Jessica, take the mic.
As far as the SEL instruction, I guess you're aspiring to have your teachers deliver that to the kids, correct?
I'm sorry, we're what?
You're aspiring to have your teachers deliver the SEL.
We are. Eventually, we would like to figure out how to do that.
And it makes sense. We, in a number of our schools that are using Second Step, which is kind of our SEL program, our counselors are delivering that instruction. And it's a lot for them to do, for sure. They do a great job. We were doing that hopefully to sustain a high level of fidelity, knowing that people would maybe deliver that curriculum differently and lose that strong access
And-
to all students.
And that's exact, for me, our teachers are trained in both of our evidence-based programs, so the teachers who are delivering it. But for me, if we want the impact on kids' actions and behaviors, the classroom teachers that they spend the most time with all day have to be the people delivering the message and reinforcing the message all day long. I feel the same about PBIS. If that was done in isolation and then the classroom teachers were just there, I feel, however, I do think for right now, we'll be continuing on this path that we're on, and our teacher's doing an excellent job. She's trained. We have consultants come in and assess our implementation fidelity of both programs. So we're working towards that, but I still feel strongly that, the classroom teachers at the elementary level who spend the most time with the kids, really the message should be coming from them.
And she's backed up by research,
There
behavioral
you go.
research.
So,
Natural
thank you.
settings, natural people, and where do they need the prompts and the pre-corrects? All day long.
Right.
Not just when the counselor's around.
And so that's a great point. It really should be the whole faculty trained
That's right.
on the program and on the content. And then the lessons, they do go through the lessons, and they choose together by their data which lessons they're going to teach in a given year. That is data driven.
Are your teachers then, do you have separate pool tools?
PBIS.
We do you mean the lesson plans for yes, we do. But that all of the teachers do that. Our classroom teachers at Tier 1, everyone has a hand in that and teaches those
That's why
to their
putting them in
children.
the matrix is her first step. Merging the skill sets. What you're going to have to do is have choices around which lessons, because you can't have as much varied instruction when you merge it. But I think that's okay. No, I think that's better, because you'll be able to monitor the effectiveness and do it more thoroughly when you don't have so many different lessons going on. But she's moving one step at a time. And merging them into the matrix is the first one. But until you get them blended into the teachers, but first you're going to have to make choices out of those curriculums about which lessons you're going to teach based on your data versus teaching all the lessons. The goal isn't to teach all the lessons. The goal is to teach lessons that produce a change that you can figure out how to measure.
And at the high school, we'll be working backwards, because this is what I'm really excited. I'm excited about this work of integration, because now at the high school, we know this going in. So we're going to be working with our high school team to do this from the onset, from the beginning. One matrix, integrating all, and I'm super excited. So hopefully, I will have more to share with you years down the road.
Somebody else had a question, yes?
I just wanted to let you know one of the barriers we hit is that the American School Counselors Association competencies say the school counselors have to go into the classrooms. And so they don't want to give it up, because that's how the kids become comfortable with them, so they'll go to them when they have an issue. So we're looking at how can they co-teach,
Sure.
so that we make sure that we're still building that relationship, they're still meeting their competencies.
Sure. And that's why being part of Tier 1 is important with the counselors. Excellent, yes.
Our school counselor is, I left that out. Thank you for bringing that up. She does work with our library specialist. So
Oh,
thank you for
there you go. There you go. Yes.
So I kind of want to address that, because I just recently came off the board of the American School Counselor Association.
Uh-oh, this session is over. No. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that.
I know, and I guess the way that I see it personally, and I think that the American School Counselor Association does, and the state school counseling associations, your language arts teacher, for example, is who should primarily be, is responsible for teaching writing. The entire building staff is responsible for supporting their efforts in teaching writing across all the curriculum areas. In a similar way, school counselors and school psychs are your mental health, social, emotional experts in the building who should be teaching that
right.
with the support and the very active involvement of the classroom.
And we like to, this is why Good note to end on, thank you. This is why we want a multi-tiered approach and add in a prevention piece that involves the teachers more accurately and perhaps push some of the clinical skills, have them be social-emotional leaders at Tier 1 and support teachers in being comfortable with that, with co-teaching, etc. But some of their clinical skills might be more needed with some of those Tier 2 groups that I talked about. So now that we've moved to multi-tiered in prevention, that's the key. We want to thank you I want to thank Jessica for coming all this way and sharing that with us. And have a good rest of your day, which is only half over. Can move on to the RDQs, followed by the poster session and networking where we'll have more snacks. And cookies. Yeah, cookies now, right?